Hello.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Good evening. Yeah. Um,
Good evening, sir.
yeah. Good evening. Good evening.
Sir, we'll start sharply by 5:37, sir.
Okay. Sure. 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 Okay.
Okay, sir. Good evening to all. So the session starts shortly. This is Santanayappa Sundar Raj, the regional coordinator of this particular event. Santanayappa Sundar Raj is a landscape architect based at Madurai and associate professor in Department of Architecture, Tyagaraja College of Engineering, Madurai. I extend my warm welcome to all the participants and the speakers of today's session. I once again welcome all the participants who have come here to attend the events in World Landscape Architecture Month celebrations at Madurai, conducted by ISOLA Tamil Nadu and Pondicherry chapter. I convey my thanks to ISOLA India and ISOLA Tamil Nadu and Pondicherry chapter. A special thanks to Chairman ISOLA Tamil Nadu and Pondicherry chapter, who has provided as an opportunity to project the potentials of landscape architecture in various regions of Tamil Nadu. Etiquette. Pleasure to have you all here. This session shall begin around 5:45 p.m. Kindly follow the webinar etiquette. Keep the mics off during the entire session. Keep the camera off. Do not present your screen. Pin the speaker's presentation screen as soon as the presentation starts. Use the chat for your questions and comments for the speaker to respond in the last 20 minutes of the session. Thank you all. Now I hand over the forum to ISOLA Secretary, Landscape Architect Kumareshwari Madam.
Thank you, Ayyappan. Good evening, everyone. And on behalf of ISOLA Tamil Nadu and Pondicherry chapter, it's a pleasure to welcome you all. Thanks for your continuous support to all our session in this forum. It's great to have Dr. Jinu Kitchley, ma'am, as our speaker in this session, and Dr. Badri Narayan, sir, as our next speaker. Thanks for coming forward to present here, and I welcome both of you. To give a brief intro for the landscape architects, ISOLA and WLAM. ISOLA, Indian Society of Landscape Architecture, is a professional body of Indian landscape architects having a 700 plus membership across India. Established in 2003, ISOLA aims to provide excellence and higher standards of professional service in the domain of landscape architecture. We, part of ISOLA, Tamil Nadu and Pondicherry chapter, have been a very proactive and progressive professional group and actively engaging with all the issues concerning with outdoor spaces, environment, culture, and people. ISOLA Tamil Nadu Pondicherry chapter has been conducting many programs addressing all the above issues through web talks and other events in the past. There have been around 40 programs conducted so far. Many of our members are recognized with awards and competition won projects. We are a good mix of practicing landscape architects, teaching academicians, and student landscape architects. As architects and landscape architects, we have the core competencies of landscape architecture, environmental design, and master planning, and we engage with collaboration in ecological site assessment, sustainable design practices, ecotourism and eco-restoration, landscape infrastructure, landscape conservation, landscape urbanism, and landscape art. As we all know, development is inevitable. At the same time, environment and ecology are very essential. As experts both in the architecture and landscape architecture, landscape architects play a beautiful role of balancing the built and natural environment. I thank once again all for joining the session. Coming to the WLAM, the month of April is celebrated worldwide as World Landscape Architecture Month. ISOLA Tamil Nadu and Pondicherry chapter celebrates this event across 4 cities in 4 weekends with the theme Public Spaces through various events, talks, walks, panel discussions, virtual exhibition, competition, and public interactions. The sub-theme for the 4 cities are Blue Green for Coimbatore, Jayakumar Sir and Shushma Ma'am headed the event, and Culture for Madurai, headed by Santana Ayyapar Sundarraj and architect Lakshmi, Heritage for Tiruchi, headed by landscape architect Godwin and Ophelia Godwin, and Urban for Chennai, headed by Deepak and landscape architect Babji. The idea is to reach out to public, highlighting the importance of public spaces and how well they could connect with the context, culture, and communities. Thanks, speakers, audience, ISOLA India, my colleagues and committee members and office bearers, landscape architects, 4 regional coordinators, student members, and sponsors, and thanks to our ISOLA TNPY chairman, landscape architect Ravi Kumar sir. Once again, I welcome you all. Let's connect to public spaces. Now, let us watch the video of the virtual exhibition. Thank you. Shabana, you have to stop the presentation.
Question to moderating. Sabana.
Shabana.
Good evening, everyone.
Yes.
I would like to invite the speaker and introduce the speaker now. Jinu Loushidha Kitchley is an architect, educator, and researcher who has been as a professor and head with the Department of Architecture, Tyagaraja College of Engineering, Madurai for the past 11 years. Her professional journey has been a process of learning and unlearning the biases induced by the environment and the system on application of knowledge to achieve a sensible and sensitive built environment. Her PhD research was aimed at capturing the vigor and life that, that complex organic settlements have in them and which are conspicuously absent in a design settlement. The multidimensional variables involved were traced and digital technology was used to help the designer make informed decisions to achieve a holistic settlement design. This acumen to tune into multiple viewpoints and plausible outcomes has helped her to steer, lead, and navigate an archaic learning environment to an adaptive, interdisciplinary, and robust establishment. She is currently researching along with her research scholars and postgraduate students on adaptations of built environment to adverse climate conditions and crisis situations. I welcome you, ma'am. Thanks for having your presence.
Thank you, Shabana. Thank you for that introduction. Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here amidst senior architects and landscape architects. My thanks are due to the chairman, ISOLA Tamil Nadu Pondicherry, architect Ravi Kumar, and architect Kumareshwari and architect Sandhana Ayyappan for inviting me here for this lecture. Thank you so much. I see a mix of audience here. There are senior architects, there are faculty members here, landscape architects and students. I hope I convey something to all of you here. So without any ado, I think I will start my presentation now. Am I audible to all of you?
Yes, ma'am.
So let me share my screen. So is my screen visible to everyone? Okay. So today I would like to talk to you about humanizing cities using public spaces. What I mean here is how we make cities more livable to our public spaces. The proposed Sustainable Development Goals has highlighted this. It has considered public space as a key and important topic. So we all know why these Sustainable Development Goals were actually formulated in the first place. It was due to the climate change and so many other disasters that we were encountering. And the Sustainable Development Goals was to kind of mitigate the effects of such negative influences, and public spaces was identified as a key and important topic for the sustainable development. And the goal was to provide universal access to safe, inclusive, resilient, accessible and sustainable public spaces by 2030. So this was a goal which kind of wanted an inclusive space which could include women, children, older persons and people with disability to enjoy the public space as their own. So social equity being one of the highlights of sustainable development, this particular goal was drafted out and targeted to be achieved by 2030. So I think before we move on to this particular topic, the the main thing that I wanted to convey to you here is something all of us know about. These slides that I'm going to share with you are not something which is new. It's not new knowledge. It is something there always. It is something that we always see and we have grown up with. But then, as architects and as landscape architects, urban designers and planners, our representation and skill systems of doing plans, of doing views, and showing green spaces and all that, sometimes we kind of forget about these things. So I felt it is necessary to kind of list out what the highlights of a public space should be. So before going into that, I would like to clarify what public spaces are. Now, why are public spaces important? So we all know that our impressions of a city are formed mainly by the quality of public spaces. So you talk about any city, the first thing, the image that a person has about that city is based on its public space. So the image of a city is built on its public space, be it Madurai Meenakshi Amman temple is the major image element, be it Chennai, maybe Marina Beach is the biggest image element. So such public spaces hold such a very strong quality in them. So they shape community ties in neighborhoods. They are places of encounter and can facilitate political mobilization, stimulate actions, and also help prevent crime. So generally, public spaces are spaces that help prevent crime is something we all should know, we all should understand. Maybe in the further slides also I will be talking about that. So as I told you, a safe public space is very important, and public spaces which are safe actually help prevent crime. They are environments for interaction and exchange of ideas. They have health benefits, both physical and mental. In the COVID situation, we all know about that. We all have felt the need for public spaces. It is possible to go even deeper and relate the presence and planning of public space with democratic values. So they say, the more a public space is active, the more democratic that particular society is. So public space is the active participation in a public space speaks about the social equity that exists in that particular society. So a good public space is one that reflects diversity and encourages people to live together effortlessly. So, and also it increases property values, multiplies retail activity, promotes more effective and efficient transportation and mobility. So that's why, public spaces are very, very important in a city. Now, I would like to clarify how an Indian public space is different from a Western one. We've all been, as architects and landscape architects and urban designers, we've been studying and equipping ourselves with Western literature and Western way of looking at spaces. And unfortunately, that was never questioned till almost the 21st century, the beginning of the 21st century. Of course, there were certain philosophers who were talking about Indian spaces. There was Charles Correa and architects and designers who have talked about Indianness and Indian spaces. But then widely in all educational institutions, the literature was based on Western concepts, and the idea of public space was, literally the Western concept that was taught in the educational institutions. So it's absolutely clear that now that it is not possible to transfer such a Western concept into our public spaces, not just Indian, I should say all Asian public spaces, because they differ totally from the Western kind of culture. So the main difference, if you could see, I have pictures here of Oxford Street in the right, and Champs-Élysées, Paris on the left, and here these are the shopping streets and the most vibrant shopping streets in the West. And here you find almost a horizontal segregation of spaces. That is, in one plot, one function. So if this is commercial, it is commercial from the first floor to the ground floor to the last floor. So this kind of spatial segregation is very uncommon. In fact, it is never present in Indian spaces. So this, we never thought of that till we entered the 21st century. All our land use plans and all our master plans were based on, where we give yellow color for residential and red for commercial, and we just segregated plot units based on just one function. But our ancient cities and our Indian cities never functioned like that. So this was one important characteristics of an Indian space that we should keep in mind. We are a very active culture. We have so many things happening at the same time. Our midday meal is an example. We have so many things in our plate at the same time. So that is something which we should have been proud of, but then our education system didn't show us that for a long time. And one more thing, so in India and in Asia, we have these vertical multifunctional dimension, wherein each function is not just separated by the floors alone, but also by time. During the evening, that particular thinai will become a sleeping bed, and in the morning it will become a shop. So things like that keeps happening. And in the ground floor, you have the shops. In the first floor, you have the houses, and you have balconies wherein you have other activities happening. So there are layers and layers and layers of activities in each of these cells. So this is something which is very characteristics of Asian streets, which we were not, of course we know about it, we have seen about it, but then our system of this representation of maps and of drawing maps and making plans never addressed this. So we kind of made ourselves handicapped by the way in which we represented our drawings. And of course, this is again another example of how vibrant the streets are. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, ma'am. Are the slides moving? We're seeing characteristics of an Indian public space.
Oh, okay. I am moving, but it's not seen, is it?
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry. I will stop and share again.
Yes, please.
Also press that hide button at the bottom of the screen.
Okay, sir. Okay. Are you able to see now?
Yes, ma'am. Are you still in fourth slide?
Yeah. Is the slide changing now?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay, so this is the slide that I was talking about the Western spaces where horizontal segregation of spaces happens. You know, one plot is one particular land use. This is the Western shopping streets that I was talking about, and this is how is the slide moving? Is the slide moving?
Yes, yes.
So yeah, so this particular example is about how vertical multifunctional dimension is always there in our Asian streets, with respect to space and time. You know, the function keeps varying. So this is something I was talking about. And another particular aspect of our spaces is that, you know, our spaces are kind of, we don't need a particular open space. We don't actually, in our culture, of course, we do have maidans, we do have markets and all that. But unlike Western culture, where they have a skating rink, a polo ground, or a park and all that, our culture did not have spaces segregated specifically for such functions. But then, you know, it became, it doesn't mean that we didn't have such activities. It all became a kind of, you know, agglomeration inside the city itself. So the street became the contextual substitute to Western's urban park or square, becoming a place for access, social gathering, and living area. So I hope the slides are changing. Are you seeing children playing here?
Yes, ma'am. And old people sitting in the veranda.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So, as I told you, we do not have spaces specifically for this. I'm not saying, you know, it's we need and we shouldn't have playgrounds and things like that. But then, what I'm trying to say is that is, you know, this kind of culture is kind of imbibed in us, and it is very, very important for us to accept and acknowledge that, you know, instead of just ignoring such things, because these are going to become the most important factors of public space, and these things will have to be acknowledged by us. And furthermore, you know, we have religion playing a very, very strong, you know, having a strong impact in our public spaces. We all know how trees often have spiritual or religious meanings, and how, you know, a space under a tree could become so vibrant and so active. So that is again a part of our culture, where, you know, nature is kind of venerated. And unlike the Western culture, where, you know, landscape and was trimmed and topiary was made, you know, our especially the southern traditional landscape was always this wild and a natural way of landscape, and that kind of you know, venerates nature itself. So that is the essence of us. And of course, as I told you, religion has a far-reaching effect on the people's way of life, dictating their activities. Even their street behavior is dictated by religious activities. We all know how, you know, people react to a compound wall in general, and a compound wall with red and white paint. Religious traditions are imbibed in us. It has controlled the way we behave and the way we engage with others throughout centuries in our culture. Similarly, you know, occupation. Streets were named based on existing trades. We all know so many streets with occupation names in Madurai, Vadayalkaratheru, Nagakadatheru, and things like that, where the whole street is for a particular trade, and such kind of activities, you know, the similar activities being together, aggregated together, was giving, is even today it gives so much of liveliness in that particular area. So these are something which are very, very typical of Indian streets, which we all should acknowledge and we all should keep in mind and celebrate while we plan and design. And let me now just give you a quick reminder, I should say, because I'm sure all of you know about this, of how we achieve safe, inclusive, resilient, and accessible public spaces. Okay, so the first thing is a clear set of territorial markers. So you need symbolic barriers differentiating public space from semi-public space and semi-public space to semi-private and semi-private to private. So we all know, as architects, we all know how important it is, this hierarchy of space, to achieve this hierarchy of space. So that has to be done in any particular public space to have, and it should be done by territorial markers. It could be change in texture, it could be landscape, it could be the color of the landscape, it could be the size of the plants, whatever, but then clear territorial markers to say that this is the place where I sit and eat, this is the place where I walk, this is the place where I sit and watch. So such kind of communication, each of the elements should give to the user. So like, so these are some examples. This is Tepakulam, and we see how people automatically sit there, and there's an open space, and they use that particular space to sit and relax, and the platform and the next territory is used for parking. So such kind of territorial markers is very, very essential in landscape architecture. And again, in this picture, you see how the cycling track differs from the pedestrian path and things like that. And one more thing that we will have to make sure, not just our landscape architects, the planners and urban designers, that there shouldn't be any space under nobody's clear jurisdiction. I keep telling this example in my urban design class, like how in an apartment we all sweep in front of the door and push it to the staircase, because that staircase is considered as nobody's place, so such kind of spaces should be avoided. It can be avoided, it can be planned such that you avoid such spaces, and because such spaces will invariably become will not be maintained, and in due course of time will become areas of crime. So of course these are pictures of dead spaces under the flyovers, and how landscape architecture could transform it into public spaces, safe and accessible public spaces. And the next thing that each of the public space should have to make it safe is natural surveillance. Natural surveillance is something all of us already know. It is something where you don't have these formal cameras or the security personnel sitting there, but then there is a shopkeeper who keeps his shop open the whole day, and my children can play next to his shop because I know that person is there, and he kind of there is an interaction and bonding and bridging there between people. So I don't have to tell that person, please take care of my children, but it just happens. So such kind of opportunities is there in our system, is there in our culture, is there in our spaces, in all our cities, in ancient cities, and even new cities after after a point of time, they develop into these kind of places, basically because that is what our culture is. And we should make sure of having such natural surveillance in any public space, because natural surveillance automatically gives a feeling of safety. So I'm just showing pictures of how people, selling hawkers there, are kind of making that space more active and more safe even during night. So such is the potential of surveillance. And hawkers and hawking is one very important potential that could be used very, very wisely to achieve safety in any public space. And the next thing that we should also know about while talking about safety is the sight lines, and of course informal surveillance, or the surveillance that I talked to you about, casual surveillance. Now sight lines is something, I should be able to see till the where I'm going. It shouldn't be like, if in this particular picture here, if there are trees that are blocking my eye view, if the trees are, if that particular person standing there under the tree, if the tree is lower than my eyesight, then I don't feel safe there, because I don't see beyond that. So it is very important that sight lines are maintained, and I'm sure all landscape architects will know that and acknowledge that, because in parks especially, we need to make sure that we just have a low, these sight lines are not sight lines are not affected, so that we could have a visual continuity, and we could either have tall trees or short shrubs, and the parks should be seen from the street. It should be visible from the street also, so that the sight lines are there from so many points of view, and that is important to achieve safety. So again, this particular example, these cars here, I know cars are, sore to our eye, but then all of us do have this in front of our house, and it's a necessary evil. So, what I'm trying to show in this particular picture is these cars here, they maybe the particular owner is nowhere here, but then the car is safe. That is basically because all the houses have windows that are opening out to the street, and the cars are standing there and they are safe. So ensuring that there are multiple viewpoints to a particular space makes it safe. And when as landscape architects, we need to look at opportunities of in parking, and try to understand how green spaces could be given. And the next thing is, of course, use of building and landscape forms to communicate a positive image of the residents of an area to outsiders, rather than saying that the population is the vulnerable one. So a positive image can be very easily given by the landscape that is there, and a positive image is very important for the safety and sustainability of that particular area also, because if there is a negative image, when I say negative image, when I see that particular place, it looks all rotten and old, and automatically I feel that place is not safe, because I feel there is no human intervention, there is no human activity there, and it looks like a dead space. So automatically it repels the outsiders and it invites miscreants, it invites crime. So for a particular space, for a particular city to project a positive image to its residents and to the outsiders is very, very important, and that could be easily achieved by landscape. And you need to locate you need to identify the vulnerable population first. You know, when I say vulnerable population, I mean children, women, old people, disabled people, and people who are sick. All of these vulnerable people who are in the lower ladder of the economic status. All of these people are vulnerable population, and as landscape architects and as designers of public spaces, you need to first identify and segregate these people, identify their needs, and then try to include them and involve them in all possible ways in your space. So when we are talking about democracy and social equity, this is something that all of us should encourage and try to bring in all public spaces. The more the vulnerable population are involved in public areas, the safer they are, and they become, the antisocial behavior becomes really less. And the need for mixed primary uses, this is what I was talking about when I was saying about the segregations in Indian streets, and the mixed primary uses, like you can mix primary uses like housing and commercial, and maybe some kind of certain workspaces. So all of these could be mixed, and even while you're planning a public space, we need to see that we are packing in as much of activities, as we are bringing in different types of people, and we are bringing in different types of activities and during different times of the day. So that is very important. So when that is done, again, the public space becomes very safe and secure. And this is another important thing, the need for small blocks. Maybe I should tell you that this is about the human scale that is needed in certain public spaces. We all know how in very big maidans and things like that, the public actually do not, it is proven that in public spaces which are really large, beyond the perception of the human mind, what happens is people don't go into the center of the space at all. They maybe loiter around the periphery because the human scale is lost. So that's why, in Trafalgar Square, if you see, the whole space has smaller elements, which kind of becomes the magnets, and that then the bigger space becomes a success. The big space is broken down into smaller elements with magnets, and around it there is landscape, and then it becomes a success. So the accessibility and the human perception of spaces also needs to be understood while addressing a public space. And the need for aged buildings. This is a very important question. Why do we need heritage? Why do we need to conserve heritage? And invariably I ask this question to my students, and most of them tell me that heritage is about me and my identity, and so I need to preserve it. That is definitely right. And especially in this particular global identity, the global movement going on, our identity is at stake, and it becomes very important to preserve our identity, basically because it is something which was crafted by us in this context, in this situation, through several millennia. So by that knowledge, if that knowledge is lost, if that knowledge is not given credit, then we are losing out on several thousands of years. So that is very important. And in public spaces, this is Jane Jacobs, has very clearly talked about this in her book, where she says, aged buildings give give a particular space its its rootedness. So people around these buildings actually feel very safe, is what philosophers has told us in talked about age buildings. It is basically because we see that the survival of through so many years, and then we feel safer in such societies. So it is very important in public spaces. If there are aged buildings, it is very important to highlight them and bring them to life back and use them as a life-giving element of that particular space. And the next thing is, again, the need for concentration. So, there was a time in planning where we talked about garden city and how each house should have so much of land around it and all that. And but that concept totally failed. And today, with the climate change and all that, and the resources, depletion of resources, we are talking about high concentration and high density cities. Okay. And it is good, but then we also know that as I was already telling you, public spaces needs to have such kind of concentration, different types of activities, different age groups getting involved, different times of the day it should be used, a variety of uses and variety of activities should be there. All of that should be there, but then there is a negative side to that. We all know how such very strong, very dense urban areas become heated up, and we all know about urban heat island effect and all that. So landscape architects, and they play a very important role in creating the more green and more natural environment that reduces such kind of negative effects. Okay. So again, landscape is very important, and we need to look at public spaces not for cars and traffic, but for people and places. So another thing is a space for different activities, a space for different time, a space for different age should also be there, multi-dimensional planning. So as I told you, one particular space can transform itself in different times, and such kind of activities should be planned in public spaces, so that it becomes more active, and the whole public space becomes more safe and livable. And of course, the last point that I should talk about here is the resilient public spaces. How we make public spaces resilient with nature. And I'm sure all of you know this. Nigel Dunet, professor of planting design and urban horticulture, says that the priority for choosing your urban green should be high visual, in the order of importance: high visual appeal, low inputs, easy and simple maintenance, high ecological function, and climate adaptation. So these are the points that I wanted to stress upon about public spaces and how to make them more livable. If there are any questions regarding this, we can go ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. That was a splendid presentation.
Is it now the question itself now or later?
We'll have the question and answer at the end, sir.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you, ma'am. It was very interesting, and thank you for giving us such interesting insights and addressing the need of the hour. I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions at the end. I kindly request you to wait. And also a kind request to all the participants to keep yourselves muted and post your questions in the chat box. We will get back to it after the next session.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Moving right along, I invite Architect Santana Ayyappan Sundaraj to invite our next speaker.
Thank you, Architect Lakshmi. Now we will move on to the next session. It is Dr. Badri Narayanan Tyagarajan. I welcome sir. So I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Badri Narayanan Tyagarajan. He is the senior ophthalmologist practicing in Madurai for the past 30 years, trained at Government Rajaji Hospital, Madurai and Shankara Nethralaya, Chennai. Currently head medical services at Dr. Agarwal's Eye Hospital, Arapalayam, Madurai. Practicing squint specialist. He is an amateur ornithologist for the past 35 years. He has completed correspondence course in ornithology with field exercises from Bombay Natural History Society. He has organized the Meghamalai Wildlife Sanctuary Bird Survey and participated in many bird surveys. He is passionately carrying out native plants propagation and involved in planting such trees in places like Madurai Medical College, Government Rajaji Hospital, Madurai Kamaraj University, Apollo Hospital, etc. He has published various papers related to birds, especially birds of Sirumalai Hills in Indian Bird Journal and birds of Alagarkovil. So these are all his contribution towards his passion. Now we will move on to the presentation of Dr. Badri Narayanan Tyagarajan. Sir, please you can take over, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and good evening to all of you assembled here. It's a great privilege for me to be addressing the senior and leading landscape architects of Madurai and other places in Tamil Nadu also. I'm extremely thankful to Ayyappan sir for the opportunity to talk to you all. I am also thankful to the Department of Architecture in Tyagaraja Engineering College, as well as Professor Chandran, and also the ISOLA group of landscape architects, and especially the Madurai chapter as well as the Tamil Nadu chapter for inviting me over here. So I think it's a great privilege for me to be addressing you. I want to emphasize that. This is the short gist of what I'm going to talk to you about. And I think we'll slowly go through each part of this short list of things that I am going to talk to you about. The first thing is to, you might all be wondering as to why is an eye specialist coming to talk about native plants to a group of landscape architects and scattering of other people from other walks of life also. It all started because of my bird watching hobby, which slowly graduated on to become an amateur sort of pastime. And ever since I built my home some 15-20 years back, it deviated on to looking at plants, especially those plants which are friendly to birds and trying to procure them and planting them in my garden. And then went on to analyze as to which noti plants should be planted in any such garden. And since I'm based at Madurai, I try to look at which plants were there in Madurai in the bygone years and days. And I landed upon many of the olden literature of Madurai, especially the Sangam literature. And especially, I should point out to you Selapati Garam, which has a very good record of many of the plants which are seen in and around Madurai and along the river Vaigai. The other information about these native plants in and around Madurai can be obtained from many of the sacred groves which are there in and around Madurai. I understand that there's going to be a talk by one architect about the sacred groves of Madurai tomorrow. I hope to listen to what he has to say about this. And also, you should also include the Sthalavraksham or the Talamaram of the temples in and around Madurai, especially Meenakshi Amman temple, Tirupparankuram temple, and other temples. So, I think this is how my journey has been towards plants. I don't know whether what I'm going to tell you about these plants will be of hope it will be of relevance to you all who are engaged in landscape architecture. Now, why do you want to advocate native plants? As far as I am concerned, being a bird watcher and an amateur, it always has been as to in what way do the birds benefit from the plants that have been planted here or which are going to be planted here. And if the plant is not of much use to the bird, then it would not find a place in my garden. For example, there was quite a bit of discussion, and the ordinary trees which are planted in many gardens in and around Madurai. For example, I think of kuya, you think of palm tree, coconut tree, and other things for Madurai, and other similar trees were said no, these do not have a place in my garden. Of course, many of those ideas were also to some extent mistaken. For example, I was strongly against mango being planted in my garden initially, and finally when I came to know about the benefits of having a mango tree in your garden, I changed my ideas. But mostly I've excluded many of these exotic plants from my garden. Of course, one or two are there, exotic plants are there, but the majority are native plants. These are some of the what shall I say, attributes of native plants which make them very suitable for your place. I think Professor of Architecture was discussing about the ecological role of the open spaces, and it was a bit way down of the 6 points that it was mentioned by that professor from Sheffield. I think that was the 5th point which was being mentioned as the ecological importance of the open area. Being a nature lover and a bird watcher, it was the topmost thought in my mind, and all other points were not considered at all. I mean, each one has has a garden for his own purposes, and therefore the needs and requirements will vary from one garden to the other garden. So these are some of the requirements. I think I would like to stress upon the fact that the native plants and the all the other living beings are what shall I say, they made for each other. I mean, something like husband and wife who are made for each other and live happily ever after. Some sort that sort of a strong relationship is there between these native plants and these birds. And whatever way you plan your open space or your garden, there has to be some place for the cycle of life to go on, and the web of life to go on. Otherwise, it will reach a dead end. Whatever plants you plant may be nice to look at, but if they don't procreate and produce fruit and flowers, and in turn are not eaten by birds and other insects, then the life cycle becomes dead, though it may be very nice to look at. The other thing is about keystone species. There is, I mean, I should not be talking about keystone to architecture students and professor of architecture, but at the same time, just as the keystone is very important in an arch, so also you have several trees which are keystone species, almost equivalent to the support that the keystone gives to the arch. Here also they support the whole environment around them, and they're very much important for the other plants, other insects, and all other denizens of that particular place. So such is the importance of these keystone species. And the other thing is protecting natural heritage. Madam was talking about heritage buildings, but I don't think that there are any heritage buildings which have been existing from, say, 6th century, 7th century. Whereas many of these natural heritage plants were there even during 6th and 7th century, and I believe it is our bounden duty to preserve not only the man-built heritage structures, but also the natural heritage of Madurai, which I believe should take a precedence over the man-made buildings. So some of the literature which I would like to discuss is about these four ones. I think some of you may be speaking different languages and may not be able to follow, but I'm not going to go deep into these literature sources. Just it will suffice to say that these are some of the literatures: Paribadal, Tirumuruhatrupadai, Selapadigaram, and Kalittogai, and the years around which they were constructed or written. Most of them highlight many of the same plans only, and therefore it establishes that that these plans were not an imaginary plant written by the poet, because they have the liberty of cooking up stories and whatnot. But the fact that all these four, or at least these about three great epics describe the same plans in and around Madurai, it shows us that these plans were really in existence in Madurai during those days, and they are not an imaginary one. So one of the foremost of these epics is the Paribadal, which there are several poems in Paribadal. In Paribadal number 11, he talks about the Calophyllum, Inophilum, the Shenbagam tree, and the Vengai tree, the Pterocarpus marsupium also, and also about the Shengandal, which is the native flower of Tamil Nadu. So it also tells us that Madurai was not called as Madurai there. It was called as Thirumaruda Neer Poondurai, that is Thirumaruda Thurai, meaning that Thurai means at some place on the river bank, and Thiru is some sort of a courtesy thing in front of anyone's name. So this Maruda Thurai is refers to, there is a spelling mistake here. Maruda Thurai refers to the place where you have lots of Maruda Maram along the river Vaigai here. Also about my favorite literature, olden literature, which is Selapadigaram. Please read the English translation. I mean, such is the description of the river Vaigai and all the flowers which are found admixed with the flood waters of river Vaigai. Mind it, some of these flowers are from the trees along the banks of the river in Madurai itself. Some might have come from higher reaches of river Vaigai also. But I mean, all three of them, Kannagi, Kovalan, and Kaundi Adigal, both cried out in wonder, this is not a river, but a stream in blossom. I mean, that's a very, you can't imagine the present day Vaigai as a stream in blossom. It is nothing but filth, if I may say so. We go on to the next slide. I'm just discussing about these trees, trying to follow some of the whatever little that I know, negligible thing that I know about landscape architecture. I'm just trying to classify these plants into based upon their height into the various possible trees. And the first one is the tall trees. The foremost among them is the tree called the Marudamaram, from which Madurai gets its name. This is a really huge and massive tree. I hope you are able to see the cycle at the bottom of the picture there, and compare the height of the tree with the height of the cycle there, and also the bike which is standing below. Just is the great height of the tree, and hardly any of these trees are left behind in Madurai, especially trees of such height and splendor. Very few are left behind in Madurai, and therefore I think this is definitely a living heritage, and it needs to be preserved. There can't be any doubt about it. I mean, what support does it give to birds? This is a nest of a crested hawk eagle. You can see the trunk of the arjun tree, pale grayish green color. And this is a crested hawk eagle nest. This tree is seen along the Selambar Valley in Alavarkoil, in the path that you take from the main temple at the foothills up to Palamadu Cholai. At the footpath, you will see these big trees there. Now, this is the photograph of the juvenile crested hawk eagle, just to show the bird. As I was telling you previously, it is extremely tall tree, and as tall trees have, these have a extremely buttressed base, almost to support the strength of the give strength to the tree, and to support the tree. It has buttresses all around, and these are some of the two places, two examples of places which are named after these Marudamaram, in addition to Madurai for that matter. The next tree that I'm going to discuss to you about, this photograph of the tree with its peeling bark is from Ayanar temple near Madakulam. So Madakulam has a very fine example of tree. So also you get large trees in Madurai Medical College. Some of these examples. The other tree is in the in Arasaredi also. There is a large arjun tree. This I would say is a mecca for bird watchers. It's a sight to behold for, especially when the tree is in flowering. The mass of red flowers. Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, the leaves are moving,
Yes,
aren't they? Okay, thank you. So these red flowers are a sight to behold, and these red flower, as you see here, has a deep cup and has a lot of nectar. And I should say that all the red flowers have a lot of nectar, and they have practically no smell, and they are very strongly attractive to birds which sip up the nectar. And there is so much nectar is there is in these flowers that not only are they attractive to the regular nectar feeders like the sunbirds, the white eye, the flower peckers, and the leaf birds, but all other birds, starting from the crow to the myna to the tree pie, even the woodpeckers. So many birds are dependent upon the nectar which these plants afford. Sadly, these trees are being taken over by the other tree which is non-native, which is called as Ceiba pentandra, which is a white flowered silk cotton tree. And therefore, I think there is a great place, there is a necessity for these trees here. I don't know what has happened to the red silk cotton tree which was there in the West Tower Gate. I remember in the initial video that was going on about ISOLA's activities in the West Tower Park. I haven't been there recently. I hope this tree is still being preserved, because there's a tree which is worth to be preserved. Very much needed tree. You can see these birds feeding upon the nectar in the red silk cotton tree. So this also, as it is a very large tree, it has these buttresses. Leaves are shed by these leaves, and hardly you find any tree in Madurai, except perhaps the west tower gate. I don't know whether it's still there. I have planted 2 or 3 red silk curtains, especially 2 of them are there in the government Rajaji hospital. This is Shenbagam or Champak. So this also finds a place in the literature. I'm not sure whether it grows very well in Madurai, even though it finds a place in the literature. It is supposed to be there in Viratipattu. There's a school there in Viratipattu. It is there. But actually, it is usually seen in the lower elevation in 1,000 feet to 1,500 feet. For example, Elagri, it is pretty common there. I mean, it's the flower scent is so good, and it finds a place in the famous perfume called as Joy. It is a Salavraksham of these temples, mostly in Tanjore district. So it ought to find a place in Madurai. You should be able to grow it here also. And it has a great link between Tagore and Champa, where he describes the relationship between a small child and the child's mother. So that is the Champa flower. The ficus species are called as keystone species. We were discussing about keystone earlier. Why is it called keystone species? So many different animals are dependent upon it. It is pollinated by these blastophage wasps. In Tamil, it used to be called as a, I mean, there is a statement in Tamil saying Atti Putar Pola, saying meaning that ficus species do not flower at all. But in fact, all these so-called synconium or fruit-like things are, you have male parts as well as female parts inside, and the caterpillar of these blastophage wasps are the ones which cause pollination among these male and female parts. So the other important thing is asynchronous fruiting. That is, supposing if you in a garden, if you plant all neem trees, all the neem trees will fruit at one particular point, and at other particular times the birds will not get any fruit to eat. Whereas if you plant ficus species, all of them have a habit of asynchronous fruiting. The same species tree will fruit at different times of the year in the same place. Almost so much so that they want their fruit to be spread all and wide, and therefore they are inviting all the birds to eat the fruits so that their gene flow is not hindered at all. So that such is the significance of this asynchronous fruiting of this ficus species. And also they have the potential of creating a forest. Supposing you have a degraded area and you want to create a forest there, it is enough if you plant ficus species there and keep back and sit back. The bats will come over to eat the fruits, the birds will come over to eat the fruits, and the excreta of the bats and fruits which come to that place are enough to recreate a forest. So this is the Atti chestnut, but many of these ficus trees are very huge and may not be suitable for gardens. What is suitable for a garden is this tree, which is a small tree called as pirain, and it is these fruits are also very attractive to a small tree to have, and does not occupy that much of space and can be used to create some sort of an ecosystem where birds are also benefited. Pterocarpus massium, yet again, is another huge tree. There are poems in Tamil literature comparing to when you have these flowers which are fallen down on a rock. From the distance it appears as though that a tiger is sleeping on the rock. These yellow flowers and the dark pattern of the rocks appears to the onlooker as some sort of a tiger. So it is a deciduous tree. The nearest place that I have seen here is in Nalaur Koil. It's an important source for resin also. On this Ballimalai Murugan temple near Velur has this tree as the Salavraksham. So coming to the moderate size trees, this is does not find a place in many of the literatures, but it's called as Melena arborea or kumil, and the flowers are attracting to many of these sunbirds. I hope you are able to see the purple rump sunbird feeding on the nectar from the Melena arborea tree. This Adinanthara pavinina, that is the Anakundamani, it is called as. So Manjadi is also it's called as. So these have these red pods, and the flowers are also there. And these seeds are supposed to have equal weights, and are supposed to so equal it is that it's supposed to weigh gold also. Madurai head post office has a good sized Adinanthara tree also. The other tree which is native to Madurai, and Madurai was supposed to be a Kadambavanam. Meenakshi temple was supposed to have been built in a Kadambavanam. These are the Madurai and Vrindavan. Both of them have Mitragaina as the Sthalavraksham. One has to be careful because in many of these olden day literature, sometimes it is called as Maravam or Maravam, or sometimes in Kadambu. Kadambu, you find it very rarely. Most commonly, it's called as Maravam or Maravam. So then, how do you know that the Kadambam, which is supposed to be this Sthalavraksham of Madurai, is that this particular species or not anything else? For example, there is another Kadamba called as Neolomarchia Kadamba. There is another Kadamba called as Manja Kadambu, which is used as for building furniture and things like that. Manja Kadambu is Haldina cardifolia. So all these three trees are Kadamba. And how do you know that this particular tree is the Sthalavraksham of Madurai Meenakshi Amman temple? If you find the old trees in Madurai, they are all only Mitragaina parvifolia and not anything else. I am thankful to my friend Karthikeyan, who was pointing this out to me, and it is not Neolomarchia Kadamba but Mitragaina. If you go to near Capron Hall School, there is an old temple called as Kadambishwarar temple, which has a huge Mitragaina parvifolia tree, and that tells you that this tree is really the native tree of Madurai. So almost many of us might get scared by looking at this. Almost looks like the coronavirus with the spike protein there. These are the various ways the Kadamba flower has been described. The inner Kadambu means it is a inflorescence. So this is the inflorescence of Kadamba tree. And also the many of these insects, this is a bee humming moth and bee hummingbird, sorry, and this crow butterfly, all of them are nectar seekers feeding on the Kadamba flowers. The other plant is the Salvadora persica or Uga. I don't know why it is not being used in Tamil Nadu as an equivalent to neem, but in all over North India, it is called as meswak, and it is a toothpaste which is used for brushing one's teeth. Here in Madurai, there are two large trees in American College. There is also a large tree near Umachigulam. There is a sacred grove there. So this Salvador persica is some sort of a delight for all these bulbuls. So this is a red-vented bulbul. I hope the picture is relatively clear for you. So you can see these stalks of the flower stalks, or rather fruit stalks of these Salvador persica, and these red-vented bulbuls are going berserk over these fruits. They are doing all sorts of acrobatics and trying to eat those fruits. It is I saw this tree at a place near Pudukkottai, and really it was a wonderful sight to behold. There are around 20 to 25 red-vented bulbuls all over the place around the tree, feeding on these fruits. So the red-vented bulbul. The other one is Mahulam or Vahilam or Vahulam. It's a very scented flower, and the fruits are eaten by birds. And this is a huge tree which is seen near Singaponari. So I've seen it in Alargar also. There's a large tree in Arapalayam waterworks also. The importance of these flowers is that they retain the fragrance even after they have fallen down. Calophyllum inophyllum or the Surapunnai, this was formerly used, the oil was used for lamps in these temples. In Kalakkadu and Mylapore, it is a Salavriksham. Though it is coastal, it is also seen along the rivers. For example, it has been present along the river Vaige as per the literature. I have seen it as far as Steni also along the river Vaige also. So the if you see this min LI, the leaves are shiny, almost the sparkle of their own, and that's why it is mentioned as min LI in the olden literature. The flowers are really nice looking and white in color. The coming to another flower, which is the Indian coral tree, and these, as I said earlier, all these red flowers offer a lot of nectar, and this nectar is really very. I mean, all these birds are flocked towards these flowers and sip on the nectar. Here is a sunbird feeding on it. Here is a chloropsis or a leaf bird feeding on the nectar from this coral tree. So coral tree is an interesting tree, and definitely should find a place in a garden where you want to attract birds. This is a tree which has a Tamil proverb attached to it. உதிய மரம் வந்து உத்திரத்துக்கு உதவாது. That is, Uttaram is of particular relevance to all the architects here. The Udiyam tree is not strong enough and cannot support the building. It cannot shore up the roof of the building. That is the meaning of the statement that உத்தரத்துக்கு உதவாதுங்க அப்படிங்கிறது. But the proverb was created by probably a mason or an architect. I don't know. It was not created from the point of view of ecology. Why? This tree fruits during summer, and during summer you have these fruits are really, I mean, even crows and bulbuls are really fond of these fruits, and they follow the fruiting of the tree and feed upon them. So this is a interesting tree to have. There are quite a number of big trees in Madurai streets. This is Alangium salvifolium or Alinjal. So here the flowers there and the fruits are there. These trees were photographed in Solai Valarth Ayyanar Koil near Karaikudi. So many of these sacred groves in around Karaikudi have these trees there. It's a Salavriksham of this Vairavan temple near this thing. Forgot it. Okay. Small trees. So Keshiya fistula also is the Salavriksham of Thiruvappudiyar temple near Madurai. It's a dry deciduous tree, and the flowers are definitely extremely attractive, and the foliage is also attractive. Ashogam means asogam, that is sorrowless. So it is also finds a place in many parts of Salpati Garam. All three religions are associated with it, and it is the true Ashoka, and we're not talking of the false Ashoka. It's fairly rare in Madurai. I believe the same place in near Nagamalai has this tree there. Unlike the false Ashoka, which is the favorite of many buildings which have the false Ashoka, or let us call it false Ashoka or mast tree. The other important red flowering tree is this Bhutia monosperma or Purasu. This is at again red, and I said earlier, give lot of nectar, and this nectar is the birds are very fond of these nectars. And here is the chestnut-shouldered Petronia. Chestnut-shouldered Petronia is also otherwise called as the yellow-throated sparrow. Yellow-throated sparrow is strongly linked to Salim Ali, who can be called as the father of Indian ornithology. His book autobiography called as The Fall of a Sparrow refers to the yellow-throated sparrow. So many of you might be fans of Sridevi, and Sridevi's film called Painar Vaidanile had this song Chendura Puve, where the flowers of this tree are depicted. This is Kongu. Kongu also finds a place in Silappathigaram. This was photographed on the way to Sirumalai. Nice looking yellow colored flower. It's called as buttercup tree, and it's a small tree. And like red silk cotton, this silk cotton is also used for mattresses. Also, shrubs. Hibiscus is the favorite of many of the houses in and around Madurai, and they afford good drinkable nectar for these sunbirds. You can even see a drop of glistening nectar at the bill of the bird. Many people are not fond of calotropis. They are fond of calotropis only around Pillar Chaturthi, Ganesh Puja, but not at other times. They have every right to be scared of this plant, because this forms a component of the juice called as madar juice. I am talking about ophthalmology here. This madar juice can also cause a corneal lesion called as madar juice keratitis. In the eye, it can be toxic. So anyone who handles this plant has to be careful that the juice does not fall into his eyes. But these purple sunbirds are extremely fond of the nectar of these flowers, and they sip the nectar from these flowers. This is Teranai or Kuravam. This is the first word in that poem that I talked about in Silappathigaram. You have to smell this flower in order to know about its fragrance. It is really heady. I mentioned about the perfume called as Joy, but I believe that this is really, I think that this is really heady and goes up to your head. Such is the fragrance of these flowers. And many of these flowers, for example, I just run through some of these flowers. Okay, this at least is toxic to the eye. For example, Teranai or Kuravan. This is Teranai. For example, Barlaria. This is Mulli. You have thorns here. This is a shrub. This is again being planted all over in Madurai also. This is again planted all over. But this Pachambaram or Nilambaram, this is again a shrub. You can't see such an electric blue in the native plants of Madurai, native plants of in Tamil Nadu and Madurai. But of course, you have the favorite of these climbers called as Jacumentia. Jacumentia is also this electric blue in color. But there is a statement in from Tirukural saying, "Kani irukka kai kavarndattu." What it means is, when there is a fruit, why do you want to eat the unripe fruit? Of course, we sometimes eat the unripe fruit also. Who can be not fond of unripe mango? Unripe mango is greatly used for all the pickles and things like that. But at the same time, there are so many of these native plants, native shrubs I'm talking about. Leave alone, I mean, hibiscus is there. Leave alone calotropis. You have Teranai is there. You have Mulli. You have this is Paulamalli. You have Valkamaria. You have this Pachambaram. You have this Kayambu. I mean, all these could be adapted by the horticulture department as well as the landscaping department in order to induce some amount of native. At least if at least 10% of native plants are included in the landscaping principles, I think that will be a great sight to behold. It was really a great color to see in the forest. This color is really interesting. So also these climbers, Hiptage kuruhu or Hiptage bengalensis, the birds are also fond of the nectar of these flowers. And I'll come to why these native plants are important for birds, even if they don't feed on the nectar or feed on the fruit of such plants also. Again, similarly, you have this Sengandal. I'm not seen it in any of the residences in and around Madurai, but it may be there. But I mean, even though it's supposed to be it's a poisonous plant, important for a drug called as colchicine, which is used for inflammation, treatment of inflammation. But it's an interesting thing to look at, and definitely should find a place in any horticultural or landscaping plan. So it is something like you can say that if you can see the flower here, which resembles a lady who is welcoming someone with a தமிழில் சொல்லுவாங்கள்ல கை கூப்பி வணக்கிறது வணக்கம் சொல்கிறதுன்னு சொல்லுவாங்கள்ல. ஸோ அதே மாதிரி it is there. So it is a favorite time flower for Murugan also, and it is suitable for gardens also. So what about Cissus quadrangulus called as pirande? Many of you might have eaten pirande chutney, and these pirande fruits are also eaten by birds. If you are eating it as chutney, why don't you have it in your home also? Epiphytes. For example, epiphytes are really hated by horticulturists, probably by landscapists also, because they destroy to some extent the tree on which they are growing, because it is a parasite and therefore it sucks the fruit and the whatever nutrients that the tree has to offer and the support it has to offer, it is stolen by these plants. But in turn, they are in turn by pollinated by birds. If you are careful, you may be able to see the bill of the bird which is here sucking the nectar. This is a long-tailed, long-billed sunbird which is sucking the nectar. We are talking about ground cover and special grasses. In all the photographs that I saw earlier, Professor Madam, as well as the previous video, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of photographs about lawns, expanses and expanses of lawns. So often these lawns are mowed now and then so as to keep the grass short and springy so that you can walk on the grass. Okay, at least if you are walking on the footpath and you have grass on the footpath, at least that could be mowed down. Whereas all other areas of the grass should be allowed to set seed. A plant is there out there in order to procreate. So a plant should flower, the flower, and in turn the fruit should come out. And what is the role of a plant which does not flower at all? The grass is there, totally uninviting grass. For the sight of an untrained person, it may look green and pleasant. For a reasonably trained person, it will look like a green desert only. So how about having these plants as ground cover? So it's if the name itself tells you, it's called as midigirai. So you can stamp upon it. So they don't climb up like anything. So it can just sprawl all along the ground. And these could be used as ground cover instead of grass itself. For example, people coming from the villages will be knowing very well about Vishnu Granthi. So the open lands and wastelands, you find this flower. Nothing wrong in, when is the city developer going to know about these plants? Why can't you introduce these plants into open spaces? And what about this Pavonia odorata, Paramutti? So this also is a very small, slender plant and definitely should find a place in such places. What about mustard kadugu? Only it necessarily should not be only for the table. The flowers are also very interesting and beautiful to look at and should find a place in any garden. What about Tumbai? You see only in wastelands but not in gardens. As I said earlier, it should find a place in our gardens and in open places also. Water plants. For example, this is a very, I hope it is a nice photograph of a lily and a whiskered tern there, photographed at Tengarai tank there. These lilies should find a place in many of these water points, and hopefully you can have not only these lilies, other water plants also. For example, Kottikilangu. This was photographed somewhere near Kanchipuram. It's also found in Madurai also. Many of the freshwater tanks in Madurai, as well as Aritapatti, you have this Kottikilangu. Very nice lavender color. Should be interesting to have in your water place. And this Sundai Kirai is also interesting to look at. So this is a very beautiful open cup flower which is also found in water. And Karunochi, this was photographed in Alarkoil, and Karunochi is a water plant. So you can have various water plants. For example, in the middle of the water, you can have these lilies. All along the edges, you can have other Persicarias and this Karunochi also. And you can have emergence as well as submerged plants also. And in top it all, you can have this all these water plants combined with the feeder also, and you can see these tawny-bellied babblers having a field day at this rock sort of a small rock pool at Yeligiri, at my father-in-law's place there, and it's very interesting to look at these having a very nice time there. So I was coming to why these plants, which may not be offering nectar or fruit, still they are important for birds. The reason is that many of these native plants have been evolving with these native insects for really about eons of years, thousands and thousands of years, so much so that their interaction has been very strong and its bonding is very strong. And therefore, if you have a native plant, you will mostly have all those insects associated with the native plant. And if the bird is there, and if the bird is raising its chicks, for example, you might have heard about sparrows, the decline of these sparrows. You might have also heard about the film which was made about the effect of electromagnetic radiation on these sparrows. But the most important, one of the very important facts is that many of these sparrows are not able to find food in the city because we all have non-native plants, and these non-native plants do not have associated insects, and therefore these sparrows do not have the food that they require, and therefore they are not able to feed their chicks and young ones, and therefore the sparrows are not found in big cities. There are exceptions at least, but I think we'll have to find out what are the reasons for these exceptions. For example, in Madurai, in Gomadhipuram, I have not found any sparrows at all. But in Melamadi, you will get a lot of sparrows there. So the important book that I can ask you to refer to is this book about bringing nature home, where having native plants means that you have native insects and means that you can have birds raising their young ones also. Otherwise, if you don't have native plants, it will be a green desert only. Many of these the homeowners and people who are asking the landscape architects for a design them a very pakka nice garden will not like such leaves, because the leaves are half eaten by insects. Whereas if they plant this plant, for example, this is Tanga Arali, you will find that the leaves are pristine and the leaves are not eaten at all. But that's what I said. It doesn't form a cycle. There is no web there at all. It is only a end at all. I mean, something like a parasite. For example, if you talk about some parasites, if the parasite causes the death of an animal, then the parasite will also die. The parasite will survive if the parasite is passed on by man to some other animal. But here, the web of life is not there at all, and therefore, but of course, there will be different types of customers, different types of people asking for landscaping work. I think it is the role of the informed and trained and architects to offer this sort of a thing. If not all plants, at least 1 to 5% of the plants, if they are native, at least they could sustain life all around them. So here is a red-vented bulbul. Any bird that you find which is not gobbling up the food that it has, insect food that it has found, but is keeping in its bill for a long time, you should be sure that it is waiting for an opportune time to go to its nest, because you may be there looking at the bird, and the bird may think that here is a chap who may be trying to harm me. Therefore, he is waiting for the chap to disappear. So once I disappear, the bird will dive headlong into the nest and feed its young ones. The other thing is dead branches. I was discussing about to some of your colleagues yesterday. These dead branches are also necessary for insects. For in an open space where you find many people going about, it cannot be possible, because these branches will fall upon the people going underneath and will cause a lot of damage. And therefore, if at all possible, in a secluded corner of the place. Madam was saying about the staircase. I mean, she was saying that all staircases should be neat, and all places should be put into place and put into use. Put into use for whom? Put into use for humans or for other non-humans? I mean, this is a space which is put into use for not for humans but for non-humans. So the other wild corner that I was talking to you about was this. This is too much of a heap. I showed one corner of the garden which is supposed to be a overfilled compost pit, but of course the rest of the garden will have the fallen leaves like this, and therefore these fallen leaves will result in mulching of all the plants here, and all the ground nesting birds and ground feeding birds like babblers will be able to find food for them. So where do we stand now? Of course, in the open spaces, this is the ratio which is there. I believe. I don't know. The Maram Madurai was a Madurai-based organization which did a lot of tree census, and I don't think there is any official tree census conducted by the Madurai Corporation at all. If at all, it is they have to do it as early as possible. And there is no tree preservation act. I mean. Probably trees are not in the horizon of any of the politician in Tamil Nadu maybe, and that is why it is the root duty of us nature lovers as well as landscape architects and other architects to put across this message that there needs to be a tree preservation act, and only then can the open spaces survive. These are the recommendation. I don't know what is the present status. What is the status at all of Madurai? As I said earlier, no census has been done in Madurai, and therefore we do not know the, as far as I know, and therefore we do not know the real data from Madurai. So the other thing that we can do is, I mean, when we are planting below these power lines, we find the electricity department is doing a very good job of giving us continuous power supply. And if you are able to listen to my talk and others talking without interruption, it means that the electricity department is at work doing its mammoth work there. But at the same time, they also cut trees if they damage or could damage all the overhead power lines. And therefore, if you have a power line going across the adjacent to your compound wall, then you can choose these small plants like Pavatai, Panja. These are all Tamil names written in English. And we have talked about Teranai also earlier, Ixora also. And these plants, if they are planted adjacent to the building along the compound wall, then if the overhead wires are there, and the overhead wires are not at all damaged by these plants, and therefore some sort of a cycle goes on. So that completes my talk. I wish to appreciate the guidance given and the photographs that have been obtained from many of these people. And last but not least, about my friend Karthikeyan, who was with whom we did several presentations together. And again, once again, I thank architect Santana Ayappan Sundaraj as well as Professor Chandran, the Department of Architecture in Thiagaraj Engineering College, ISOLA India and Madurai chapter also for the patient listening. Thank you very much, and thank you once again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was a eye-opening session for all the landscape architects. So now it is the time to thank our sponsors. So we have two sponsors, K-Light and Basant Beaton. So now we will have a small sponsor presentation. I hand over to Architect Lakshmi.
It's great, it's amazing. I just saw the lights on the bridge, they're really nice.
Thank you, Khaled, for sponsoring us at a short notice and during a critical time. Next, we'll see a small video by our next sponsor, Basant Patents.
The evolution of Basant Patents. In H 2017, Basant Patents unveiled its new experience center in the heart of Bangalore on 100 Feet Road, Indiranagar, with over 5,000 square feet of products to experience. Customers can touch, feel, and get a sense of every unique product Basant has to offer. Today, Basant Patents offers value no other company can claim to provide. On-time project completion, large-scale outputs, a diversified range of products, pre- and post-sale support, and the highest quality concrete products consistently delivered. With 9 machines and over 50 different products, come see how Basant can add value to your project.
Thank you, Basant Patents.
I request our chairman, architect Ravi Kumar sir, to come out with some questions to the speakers.
Thank you, Ayappan. At the outset, I thank both the doctors, Dr. Jinu and Dr. Badinarayanan, for coming forward and having a great presentation in this forum. I think we should first discuss the questions from the audience in the chat box. Probably we can take it first and then we can go on further. Thank you, Ayappan.
Thank you, sir.
I have a question from Architect Ramal regarding my point number 4, which was about the neighborhoods presenting a positive image. Sir, you are very right about how certain areas which which are very cluttered, do have a safer environment. For example, even in slums, they say, you can walk in the night because, there are always people everywhere, and it is supposed to be safe. But then in terms of safety, when we talk about safety, we also talk about the health aspects and the infrastructure. We talk about social equity, where we try to ensure all kind of infrastructure to all kind of people. So in that case, of course, slums have a lot of activity and all that, but then in certain cases, in certain areas, they do not work, and that has to be accepted. And of course, areas, other areas which are really active, like maybe Ranganathan Street or maybe Aman Sannadi, all of these streets which have so much activity and are cluttered definitely work well. That is what I've been showing all through, you know, how our Indian spaces work well. We all know that, you know, in US or in UK, if you walk after 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, you are definitely going to be you know, robbed or killed. But it is not so in India, especially because of the you know, the clutter that they say that is, but it is actually the intensification of activities that is happening in a place. So maybe the picture that I had put there has made them pose this question, but what I intended was not that. So
Understand, like, in fact, I posted the question only based on the visuals, that should not give a wrong
true,
impression to
true.
people that that kind of a partially looking place will be more safer. On a macro level, you can say Delhi streets are comparatively, New Delhi streets are comparatively unsafe socially, comparing with Mumbai streets. That's what they say,
Yes,
Mumbai streets
yes.
may not that adequately clean and things like that, but these streets, New Delhi streets particularly, I'm not mentioning the old Delhi, the New Delhi streets are not that safe socially. As the, I mean, on the health side, yes, it is right. What you're saying, right? So when you talk about the safety, there are two safety: only the social safety and the sanitary sanitation safetiness. That is what. Yeah. So, supposing if what do you say, this cherries, the slums become clean and neat, that becomes more livable and more safer.
Definitely, definitely. If the infrastructure is worked out properly, that is going to be the most successful neighborhood. Yes.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Lakshmi, we will move on to the next question.
Yes, sir. Ma'am, there is a question from Srimati. Uh, Thank you for an insightful presentation. So much as we talk about coexistence of street play, vending, active commercial fronts and vehicular movement, many a time the existing ROW does not allow equitable division to accommodate various activities. Even if such appropriation of ROW is possible, it becomes so streamlined that it refrains from being more Asian. How do we strike a balance between streamlining to appropriate the ROW at remaining Indian or Asian?
You are absolutely right, Srimati. I have seen, you know, in trying to be to design organically, it is somehow, you know, there are so many limitations, and we finally end up in some kind of a streamlining. But as I told you somewhere in between the presentation, I've seen very you know, what can you say, very straight line, straight jacketed approach to design becoming very organic within years, within some, you know, 10 or 15 years. People make it more organic. And I think, you know, this whole process of building does not just involve us. It involves people, and that particular understanding is very much important to us, because we think that we are shaping the future, but then sometimes even if we make a blunder mistake there, you know, they change it, they adapt it, and it happens. I think it's a process. It is a very complicated thing to achieve, but that's my stand for that question, Srimati.
Thank you,
I
ma'am.
hope I answered your question, Srimati.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, thank you.
Do share about few strategies to facilitate local community involvement in space activation initiatives in public spaces.
Can you please repeat?
Yes, ma'am. Do share about few strategies to facilitate local community involvement in space activation initiatives in public spaces.
I think local community involvement needs, the first phase is to understand the local community. Definitely, a community involves different layers of people, different activities. You need to first understand them, and then see how you could involve them in a particular place. For example, there was this study that we made for Teppakulam area, Madurai Teppakulam area, and then we as designers started looking at it as how the heritage structure could be presented better and things like that. But the local problem there was, there is a residential area behind wherein people are there without, their livelihood was those small scale industries which were there in that area, but then it is all closed now, and it is all dying. All the small scale industries have died now and are dying now, and the people there are not employed, and they are kind of moving on to some other city for construction work and all that. So that is a particular problem that is that particular community was facing, and to address such a problem in the public space would definitely kind of integrate them inside. And when we do that, when we involve the local communities into the public spaces, into the design of public spaces, the public spaces will be more sustainable in the long run.
Thank you, ma'am. I kindly request all the participants to post your questions in the chat box.
There is a question to Dr. Badrinath from architect Shushma Jaykumar. Yeah, awesome and inspiring to see ophthalmologists looking through plants, animals, birds and insects. And thank you so much, sir, for a simple and beautiful story. It is a message from architect Shushma Jaykumar, sir.
Thank you very much, madam, for that comment. That's why I started in the beginning. My story also, I discussed about it to some extent, or briefly also I explained about that also. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, good evening. There is a small discussion point with Dr. Jinu. I am Ravi Kumar Narayan, landscape architect from Chennai. Dr. Jinu, thank you
Yes,
so
sir.
much for a very great presentation, well compiled and very comprehensive about humanizing the public spaces. This is with reference to one of the first of the slides comparing the Western public spaces and our Indian public spaces, where you showed some very nice, interesting, vibrant and colorful spaces of our Madurai, where a lot of activities are happening and all that. And so I believe and think that much of this vibrant activities, what we appreciate, are very incidental and not actually planned while planning the spaces. So when we are talking about many planned developments like smart cities and all that, where I always see that they are earmarking activities for some places. For example, dedicated place for a cycle way, dedicated place for a walkway, dedicated place for a seat court, like that. We are earmarking places for certain activities. So I just want to your point of view on this, whether by going on to this kind of a planned developments, are we in a danger of losing this such vibrant, incidental, unplanned spaces in the context of Indian public spaces?
Sir, I feel when approaching a public space as a urban designer, it is definitely necessary to understand the different types of activities, like how you say, the pedestrian, the cyclist, and all that. And definitely a cyclist the requirement for a cyclist is different from the requirement of a vehicle, and it is definitely better that if he is given a separate lane, so that he is safer and all that. But as you say, we initially in a house, we initially just had one room, and people slept there, people ate there, people talked there. But then, after that, we had a bedroom, dining room, and things like that. So I think, yes, it can also happen in one place, definitely in one road. Even in most of the Madurai streets, we do see so many cyclists going, maneuvering into through the vehicles. But then, as a planner, like I just was thinking when you said, in Teppakulam, it was those crowd was just incidental, you said. Yes, the kind of crowd that happens during the festivals is incidental right now. Maybe this kind of a crowd was not predicted when the particular thing was built. But then there are spaces in the Teppakulam, there are small niches, small walkways and things like that, which had been planned for the activities that was happening then. So I think, when we are addressing a particular problem in our time, in our context, it is very, very essential that we look at the different activities that we are addressing right now. And maybe, as I told you, it will definitely, after 10-15 years, organically it will change. We cannot predict the public space future. It will organically grow. Any neighborhood, any even a housing apartment changes organically, I should say. But then I think we should plan for the activities. We should look at the context and the problem that we have in hand, and then try to give solutions. And when you're talking about smart cities and how very specific solutions are given, the problem with smart city proposals is it is not comprehensive. It is given for certain areas, a certain street, or a particular bus stand. So which definitely is not going to say, if you're looking at making the whole city smart, you will have to look at which are the places where I will need cycling, and then give this a solution, not just in bits. That is definitely a problem. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Jinu, for your optimism also. So we also jointly hope that all these public spaces will become very organic in the course of the day. And very, very special thanks to you for showing some of very bright and nicely colored streets and spaces of Madurai. Thank you so much, Dr. Jinu. There is a point of discussion with Dr. Badinarayanan. So very special thanks. We are all, very, very happy about your presentation, where you have, very practical knowledge and, amusement, the amusings of birds and this thing together. We have studied trees, vegetation separately and birds separately. And today was a beautiful cocktail of both, and how they coexist, with each other as a part of the ecosystem. You have explained with your very nice, simple photographs and notes. Very beautiful, sir. Sir,
thank you.
We all landscape architects, and we all agree that the native trees are the best for our country because of so many parameters that you have indicated in your lecture. Just one point of discussion, sir. Like there are a lot of trees which have come from outside India, maybe about 100 of years ago, from maybe Africa, from other South American countries also, and have been settling here. Probably we call them as indigenous trees. What is your observation on this indigenous trees? Any of these indigenous trees you think are very important? Do they support all the ecosystem what we are talking about as bird life or insect life?
Thank you for your question, sir. As far as the native plants are different from the plants which have come from other countries like South America, Australia, and other places. If those plants from South America and Australia have started flowering and fruiting here, that means they have found a local pollinator as well as a local agent which can spread the seeds of that particular plant. That means the plant has become naturalized. Plant becoming naturalized does not mean that the plant is native to the place where it is currently here. For example, in India, for example, if you find the pagoda tree, all households have this plumeria tree. I'm not seen any plant in and around Madurai and some parts of Tamil Nadu of the plumeria setting fruit. So that means the plant has not yet found its pollinator, and it is all of them are sterile, and probably all of them are cuttings from the plant, and the life cycle does not go on. So, I mean, if the because of the needs of the hour, or if the customer is asking for such a plant, then obviously there is, I mean, every possibility that we should have that tree around. But if, for example, say another tree, for example, take our lantana, which is the most invasive plant, which is brought in as a horticultural plant initially in the 18th and 19th century. It has found its own pollinator. All the butterflies go around the lantana flower. Almost Tamil Kocha Salon, they go around these flowers and they pollinate those flowers. And the fruits are very tasty to the bulbuls, and these bulbuls spread the plants all over the place. Therefore, that lantana has found its own pollinator, has found its own, I mean, or rather a different pollinator, a different dispersal agent in the new country. So, Poonda Veetla Vandu, it has found all these two people. So, therefore, it is able to live like a Raja here and go all over the country, no hindrance at all, and thereby it is hindering the other plants also. So if a commercially minded person is growing, for example, some plant, or for example, Melaga itself, Melaga is not part of our original culture. It's from South America or Central America. But of course, for a commercial need, there is a need for a commercial person to plant Melaga and get the produce and earn income. But whereas in a house garden or in any other open space place, I mean, it is ideally initially mostly meant for recreation, and it is equally good if you have a native plant or an exotic plant. In such other places where if we concentrate upon on native plants, then obviously the native cycle will go on. Otherwise, then the native cycle will not go on. The web of life will not be complete. So that's my contention. If we are for commercially minded person, if planting an exotic tree, it's well and good. He has to find his food. He has to earn his living, and therefore he is growing chilies. Well and good. Let him do it, and let him do it in the best possible way. But in a recreative place, I believe this should be looked into, and that was why the next question I have asked a question to Madam all others. What is the place of native plants in a regular net landscaping project? What is the real status? What proportion do native plants constitute? I want to know from your way of life, and how much, what proportion of native plants do you use? What proportion of exotics do you use? That sort of information, hope I can get from you. Thank you.
Yeah, I can answer you from my experience with my projects as a context, sir. See, there is a lot of awareness
Thank you
now.
very much, sir.
There is a lot of awareness now about the native trees and their importance, and the way you have explained beautifully in your lecture. And I mean, everybody is understanding that, how it contributes to our ecosystem, and how it's going to be good for the whole environment. So, I mean, we are all practicing architects and also teach, partly in all the colleges. So what we observe and see is, I think most of our architects and landscape architects are, preferring native species in our projects. Especially on a personal level, I insist in all my projects, the trees at least have to be native species. Even if you want for some aesthetic beauty, if you want to have some colors and exotic this thing, you can go for some ground covers and this thing. But we insist on the native species for trees definitely. And for example, if I am doing about 20 projects in my office, I think at least about 12 to 15 of my projects are having only native species nowadays. That is the awareness.
That's really great, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, that is the awareness. We also got, and we are able to transfer the awareness to our clients also, which they understand. And we should also thank very indirectly to all these natural disasters and the microclimate change, that it also makes us realize that why you have to go with the native species.
Now I call upon Professor Rukmini ma'am to share her views about the speakers' sessions, ma'am.
Yeah, before I think she is on mute. Before she comes online, I think there is a question from our senior architect, Mr. Ramalingam, to Dr. Badrinath, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Can you read that question?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This is a question to Dr. Badrinath from architect Ramalingam. Dr. Badri, as usual, it was a wonderful session. Can you suggest some tips towards micro level birds nurturing at the household or building level?
Yes, definitely. Thank you for your question, sir. I think there has to be a win-win situation where both the bird as well as the household also benefits from these plants. So the best example among those such win-win situation can be the planting of, for example, curry curry leaf tree. There is no food in these Tamil Nadu cuisine where the curry is not used, and therefore curry definitely should be there in the residence. And what are the benefits of curry to the birds around? For example, many birds feed upon the fruits of the curry tree. The bulbul as well as the koil feeds upon these fruits, as well as many butterflies also feed upon the nectar also. Many butterflies larvae also are dependent upon the curry leaves also. So in that sense, it is a good plant to have in your place. And I believe the landscaping principle of having smaller plants around the house and bigger trees away from the house will be useful for us to have a look at the garden also. If you have tall trees all around your residence, you may not be able to observe what is going on in your garden also. So that is another thing. The other thing is I was referring to one professor called as Talami from the Delaware University, in which he has talked about hubs. That is, if you think about native plants, some plants are really useful, some plants are not that useful. What are those plants that are very useful? Those plants support lots of butterflies or moths. So why, but in particular, butterflies and moths? These butterflies and moths lay their eggs on the young leaves of these plants, and the leaves are eaten by the caterpillars in turn, and they grow up on the leaves. And therefore, the plant which has a maximum number of caterpillars on it, which it can support, then that plant will in turn give a lot of food for the bird also. So, for example, if you take the mango tree itself, or the porosu, we talked about the Butium monosperma, the Sendurupuve of Painar Vaidanile. So, that also supports a lot of butterflies also. So, if you plant such trees, for example, Murangambaram drumstick tree has lots of the sunbirds, they feed upon the nectar, as well as moths. Lot of moths depend upon the tree. And if you don't want the caterpillars, Kamblipuchi, to come into your house, then you can keep it far away. In a large garden, you can keep it as far as away from the garden as possible. So planting such plants in and around your garden can be useful in attracting birds also. I am a bit not for giving artificial food or feeding food for the birds, but at the same time, if they are not finding place to build the nest, then definitely giving them possible nesting platforms or small holes or boxes for the sparrows to nest will also be helpful in attracting those small birds to the garden. Now, at the same time, water is definitely important, and it is sometimes you forget about filling the shallow earthenware saucer in which you keep the water. So it is probably you won't forget to switch on the fountain also. So if you have a fountain, tinkling of water is also there. That also makes it pleasant out in the garden, and also birds are also benefited. The birds also get attracted to the movement of water instead of stagnant water. If the water is moving also, they are in turn more attracted towards those places. So those methods could be used in order to attract the birds to your garden. I call it as armchair bird watching, where you can a person who is retired can sit on the veranda and look at all the birds going around doing their usual work. So I think that's a good way of doing bird watching also. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sir, for your beautiful answers and anecdotes. And can we invite Architect Rukmani now?
Yes, sorry, I was connecting my mic when you called last time. So I want to, both the presentations were very informative, and they both spoke with a lot of passion. So I really appreciate Dr. Badrinath for the passion for native trees that he has brought, and it was such an encyclopedic presentation. So I really appreciate you, sir. And
Thank you.
of
Thank you.
course, Jinu's, thank you, sir. Thank you for that great presentation. And Jinu's, of course, Jinu is, I know her quite well. So Jinu's presentation was a comprehensive academic view of the public spaces, and it was very interesting. I would rather say not a question, but a viewpoint that I would like her to reflect on is that when she was talking about how public spaces need to have transition between public, semi-public, and private. Whereas if you see in our context, this concept of public, semi-public, and private in itself is a Western context of, I mean, a Western way of looking at spaces. Whereas if you see in the Eastern context, you find that these are very variable domains which keep transitioning into each other, and it's at a lot of times it's very difficult to differentiate what is a public space, what is a private space, and what is a semi-public space, which I would like her to a little bit deliberate on how do you, I mean, what is the difference I mean, based on her presentation, what is the difference, and how does she think about this?
Hello, Rukmani. Nice to hear you. Yes, Rukmani, there is definitely a change in the attributes of this hierarchy when it comes to Western and Eastern or Indian. But then it is definitely there. Even in our situation, you take temple architecture, you take a Thinai house, you take a Chettinad house, there is definitely a hierarchy of space, but the spaces allotted or the area allotted might differ depending on various other social factors. Maybe a more democratic place like Greece has more semi-public spaces and public spaces.
We lost your voice. Hello?
Just give me a minute.
Yeah.
But yes, definitely I feel, Rukmani, there is a hierarchy of space in our culture also. So I differ on your point that you made, that we don't have it. We do have it, but in a different connotation. Yes.
No, I mean, I just would like to say, I didn't say we don't have it. I say in our context, the identity of these spaces keep changing. For example, if you take the aspect of a thin eye normally is a private space, but when there is a festival, especially in the Madavidis around the temple, the thin eye becomes a public space when there is a procession. So
Yes,
I
yes,
was just bringing this
yes.
idea of that in a Eastern context, the identity is always in transition, which
Yes,
to me as a landscape architect brings an additional challenge when I'm designing these spaces. So that is what I wanted to bring into
definitely,
the
definitely.
discussion.
I remember showing a picture of a balcony where people crowd during the festival times to look onto the procession. This kind of the activities change with time and seasons. That is definitely there. Definitely right,
Yeah,
Rukmani.
yeah. So that is this thing, but it was a very interesting viewpoint, and I really enjoyed your presentation also. So
Thank you so
thank you
much.
so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Over to you, sir, and Ayappa.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you, Rukmani and Dr. Jinu. In fact, today was a very beautiful session, in the context of Madurai, where, professionals like Dr. Badinaranan and academician like Dr. Jinu and a very senior architect like Mr. Ramalingam have joined us for a very, very, interesting, participative kind of a discussion. Now, I just, suggestion from my side that, our architect Sandana Ayyappan is also engaging with our corporation officials in Madurai, and he is working with some parks also. Like, why don't we, select a park and with all our, cooperation and, kind of a consortium of kind of an effect, we can, create a beautiful space in a public park with the preferably with all the native species and all that. So I think we should work together, to do this thing. So everybody is available. Our knowledge is there. Everybody can work together also. Just a suggestion from my side. We can think about it.
Sure, sir. We will do that, sir.
Sure.
Sir, few more questions. There is a question from Sonal, but the invasive species like Prosponus julifera spread and it converts land into wasteland. This is a question to Dr. Badri. Kindly share the information on the way to tackle this issues in the site, sir.
I wonder whether we should make some sort of a move to tackle it, but at the same time, it should not be a total removal without anything being planted again. I mean, one has to, both of them should go hand in hand. Once you're removing a plant, then I think immediately you should plant something else, because whatever said and done, all plants, depending upon their needs, mostly it is the same only. They take in the required amount of water. This is what the botanists tell me, that they take in only the required amount of water, and thinking that Prosopis or Sima curvula takes more water than other plants is not correct. So it takes only its required water, and it grows in even in places where there is less water, and that is the ability of Prosopis. So if at all it has to be removed, it should be removed, but it has to be removed in a phased manner, where you plant local suitable plants adjacent to the removed Prosopis. Without planting additional plants, then the whole area will become bereft of any shade or any space for birds. Many of the birds are able to find some shelter and some insects also in Prosopis. Even though the number of insects may be less in Prosopis, still birds are able to survive. So if you remove stock and barrel, if you totally remove, then all the animals are left without anything to survive upon. Therefore, it has to be done in a phased manner. I think I'm not sure about the the best method to remove it. I think the labor intensive is a physical method. There's also again going to be a safer method. Looking at biological controls means that you are introducing other potentially invasive species inside. And therefore, one should not do that. I believe even though it may be labor intensive, you have to look at removing root stock and barrel only. That is the best way I think is to remove it along with the roots also.
Thank you, sir. There are certain appreciation from architect Babji Singaram. I love Dr. Badri's way of answering with local analogy. And there is another person who has appreciated this Hopeland P. A great presentation, Dr. Badri. A nice weaving of history and local flora. And finally, there was appreciation from ISOLA Tamil Nadu and Pondicherry chapter. It was a wonderful presentation, and there is another question from ISOLA TNPY. I think the preference of non-native plants is mainly because of aesthetics and ease in pruning and maintaining their form to achieve the desired design. Can you suggest some references or guide to achieve the same with native species, sir?
I don't know much about the design part of it, but if you are designing a plant for a 3 feet hedge, then choose a species which forms only a 3 feet hedge. No point in planting a plant which grows up to 10 feet and keeping on pruning it. That is my personal suggestion. I mean, pruning that means you are stopping the plant from growing further. So why should you stop the plant from growing further? That is why I discuss about various heights of various plants. Look at the natural growth and natural height of each plant, and based upon its natural height, select the plant species suitable for your design of a hedge. So if a hedge is 10 feet, select a suitable plant. If a hedge is only 1 foot, then select a suitable plant. Don't select a plant which grows up to 10 feet for a 3-foot hedge. That is my personal suggestion. I mean, you should allow a plant to grow. I mean, something like if the only 2 people can be there in a room, packing 10 people into a room is not correct. That's what I feel. But I'm not happy with the topiary, but many people like a topiary. I think it is up to the landscape people to think a topiary. I mean, topiary is something like one of the Japanese way of having a small foot. I believe they are interested in a small foot. They tie ribbons around the foot and then make it small. Similarly to the other method of growing a big tree inside the house. I mean, what is that name?
Bonsai.
Bonsai. I mean, that is. I feel it is in India growing something like a bonsai is ridiculous. That's what my personal suggestion. You have a lot of space around. Why grow a bonsai in India? That's what I feel. I'm not sure whether topiary is needed at all. Thank you. This is my impression. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. This is the time to thank the speakers. It was a wonderful session. I first convey my sincere thanks to Dr. Jinu Loushidha Kitchley who gave a comprehensive session on urban design and as well as interlinking with the landscape elements. And once again, I thank Dr. Badrinath, who has given eye-opening session on native plants. Sir, it was a wonderful session. And as our chairman has said, we will find opportunity to work along with the Corporation of Madurai. We will make a sample park with proper principles of urban design aspects as well as the landscape design principles, integrating the native species in that particular public spaces. So it was a wonderful session. It was a great start for Madurai celebration. We have one more day with a few sessions such as a presentation on Sacred Groves of Tamil Nadu by architect Karthika Raja and a video presentation by a heritage graphic artist namely Karthikeyan from Vijayawada, who is presenting on the title namely Andrum Indrum Madurai. And finally we have a session by the international speakers Dr. Geeta Mehta Architect Despo, and finally it will be concluded by Dr. G. Balaji on waterscapes of Madurai. So I finally thank the participants who have spent their valuable time in attending the entire session. We also extend your interest to attend the events happening tomorrow and in future sessions of ISOLA's World Landscape Architecture Month celebration. Once again, thank you all. My sincere thanks to the speakers of this particular session. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madurai, for a great participation.